This video covers distance and midpoint. You will need graph paper and a graphing calculator. Okay, so the formula that we're going to use for distance is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So we can think of the distance as the hypotenuse of a right triangle. If we look at the graph that we have to the right, what we have is 2 points that are the shortest distance between 2 points is a line segment. And so we have one point that has a coordinate of -5, +1, 2, 3. We'll call this point X. So point X has a coordinate of -5 and +3. And we'll call this other coordinate, we'll call it Y. And it has a coordinate of -2, -3. So Y has a coordinate of -2, -3. So if we move over horizontally and then we move down, we can see that we can create a right triangle that the hypotenuse is the distance between X and Y. So if we remember the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is another way of thinking about the distance formula. Words that are synonymous with distance are, we're gonna have length, words like how far, and well, I guess that's it. Honestly, we're just gonna use like length and how far. So as long as we have this formula, we label our points and we can let the calculator do the heavy lifting. So for one, we're finding the distance between the 2 points on the graph. We've identified the coordinates. So for X, this is gonna be X1, this is Y1, and then the -2 is X2, and the -3 is Y2. So we're gonna have distance equals the square root of, so x2 minus x1, so -2 minus -5 squared plus y2 minus y1 is -3 minus 3 squared. So in the calculator, we only want to put what's under the square root, and that's going to be, so if you can see on my calculator, we have -2 minus -5 squared plus -3 minus 3 squared. And we get 45. So remember, we didn't put the square root, so we're going to keep the square root. We're going to have equals the square root of 45. If we do the square root, So if we did square root 45, we get 6.71. So above this, we will put 6.71. So as an exact answer is square root 45. As a decimal rounded to 2 decimal places is 6.71. So as long as we can identify our points, we should be good to go. So for number 2, we have x1, y1, x2, and y2. We will have distance is the square root of 3 minus -4 squared plus -1 minus 1 squared. So remember, some of us do get confused. Each coordinate has an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So we don't want to do 1 minus -4 and -1 minus 3. It's always the x coordinate from one point minus the x coordinate from the other point squared, and the y coordinate from one point minus the y coordinate from the other point squared. So same thing, like once we write this, let the calculator do the rest of the work. So we'll have 3 minus -4 squared plus -1 minus 1 squared, and that gives us 53. Again, we didn't write the square root, so we didn't put the square root in the calculator. So we're going to do the square root of 53, and square root of 53 as a decimal is 7.28. So the reason we are not putting the square root in the calculator is that we want to know the integer that we get under the square root, so we don't have to do it in our heads. And after we get the integer, we put it under the square root, and that's how we get 7.28. So you should pause the video, do example 3 without me, and come back and see what I get. So if you pause the video and work, you would get, let's see, x1 is -7, y1 is -2, x2 is 11, and y2 is 3. So we're gonna have our distance is the square root of 11 minus -7 squared plus 3 minus -2 squared. Again, if you can't do the math in your head, that's fine. We're gonna do 11 minus -7 squared plus 3 minus -2 squared. I bet this is 320, 349, 331, I was off. So this is going to equal the square root of 331, which is about 17 something, I think. The square root of 331 is 18.19. So 18.19. All right, so let's quickly review the distance formula. We have a formula where distance is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. All of this under the square root. So the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Make sure when you're writing this that you include parentheses, the appropriate negatives, and do not forget the square. And also make sure you're subtracting x's and you're subtracting y's. So the next formula we have is the midpoint formula, and it's used to find the halfway point between two coordinates. So if we have a point P that has coordinates x1, y1, and a point Q that has coordinates x2 and y2, the notation I like to use is the midpoint for segment PQ is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So if we think about this, we can say it is the average of the coordinates. So that's how we get halfway between any two things. We add up the two things and we divide by 2. So remember, midpoint is a point itself. So we should have two different things that we get as an answer. We should have an x coordinate and we should have a y coordinate. Now, notice that we add and we do not subtract. In the distance formula, we subtract and we add the two squares. And in the midpoint formula, we only add. So we're going to have x1, y1, x2, and y2. So if we're finding the midpoint, we're going to have, so in this case, the line segment is GH. So our notation is going to be the midpoint for segment GH is equal to 7 plus 9 over 2, comma, -5 plus -1 over 2. So this is for a test. This is a sufficient answer. You should simplify, but you'll receive most of the credit just by being able to set this up. So let's talk about a common calculator mistake that people make when they put this in the calculator. They would just do 7 plus 9 divided by 2. So we know 7 plus 9 is 16, and so 16 divided by 2 should be 8. A common mistake that students make is they put 7 and then they do plus 9 divided by 2, and this is going to give us 11.5, which we don't want. What we want is, in parentheses, 7 plus 9 divided by 2, and that gives us 8. So the x-coordinate should be 8, and the y-coordinate is -5 plus -1 divided by 2, and that is -3. So later on, when we start graphing points, we'll see that this point is exactly in the middle of 7, -5, and 9, -1. What I want you to do is pause the video, come back and see what I get for number 5. So if you're joining me again, we'll have the midpoint of segment AB is, so make sure we write down the first step completely, -7 plus 3 over 2. You know what? I forgot to label my points. We got x1, y1, x2, and y2. So -7 plus 3 divided by 2, comma, 4 plus -4 divided by 2. And so -7 plus 3 is -4 divided by 2 is -2. And 4 plus -4 is 0, and 0 divided by 2 is 0. So that's pretty straightforward. On the back, what we have is, so one of the problems that we can solve if we know, if we have the midpoint formula is we can find one of the missing endpoints. So for number 6, we have find the coordinates of A if M -1, 2 is the midpoint of segment AB, and B has coordinates 3, -5. So the first way we want to look at this is visually. So this is why we need some graph paper. It tells us that the midpoint is -1, 2, and one of the endpoints is 3, 5. And so we're trying to find the coordinates of the other endpoint, A. So since you always have access to graphing paper or graph paper, the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is to use a graph so we can visually see what happens. So we're told that the midpoint is, let's pull this up, is -1, +2. So -1, +2 is right here, and this is the midpoint. And we're also told that the other endpoint has a coordinate of 3, -5. So over 3 and down 5 is point B. Since M is the midpoint of this segment, A is going to have to be up here somewhere, because M is between A and B, so A can't be down here, it can't be over here, and it can't be over here. So the easiest way to find out the coordinates of A is to count horizontally and vertically and move in the opposite direction. So M is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a distance of 4 away horizontally, and it's a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a distance of 7 away vertically. So we went down 7. We went right 4, so we draw an arrow, right 4, down 7. So to get to point A, we want to reverse that. We want to go left 4 and up 7. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So we go left 4, and then we want to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so then we're going to put point A here. So we went the opposite of 4, which is left 4, and then we want to go up 7. So we went up 7. And so then we just need to figure out what this XY coordinate is. So this is -5 and 1, 2, so -5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this coordinate is -5, +9. So for 6, we can say the coordinate for A is -5, +9. And we're going to put an asterisk and put done using a graph. So if everything else fails, remember that you can always plot the midpoint, one of the endpoints, and figure out the horizontal and vertical distance and reverse that to get the midpoint. So again, we plotted M, we plotted B, we counted 4 to the right and 7 down, and we reversed that and went 4 to the left and 7 up, and that's how we got -5, +9. Now, of course, because this is math, we have an algebraic method for doing this, and this is the way I would prefer that you do it. So for number 7, we have, all right, we're going to write a formula over here. So the midpoint coordinate for X is X1 plus X2 over 2, and the Y coordinate for the midpoint is Y1 plus Y2 over 2. So if we're solving for either one of these endpoints, we'll multiply by 2 and subtract the coordinate that we know, but we'll see that over here. So number 7 says, find the coordinates of J if K is -5, 10, and K is the midpoint. So K is the midpoint is the thing that we need to focus on. So K has the coordinates of -5, 10, and L, one of the endpoints, is -8, 6. So we know the K, so K is the midpoint, so the midpoint coordinate is Now, you know what? Let's write this better. So the midpoint coordinate for x is -5, and that equals one of the x coordinates plus the other x coordinate. So -8 is to the left, so we're going to say we know -8 plus, we don't know the second x coordinate, so plus x2 over 2. So it's a two-step equation. We're solving for x2. The first thing we need to do is multiply by 2, so we would get -10 equals -8 plus x2. All right, show some work. So then we're going to add 8 to both sides, and we get -2 equals our second x coordinate. So for J, right now, we know the x coordinate is -2. And then if we're going to find the y coordinate, we're going to do the same thing. We know the midpoint coordinate is 10. So we have 10 equals, the first y coordinate is 6, plus we don't know the second y coordinate, and we want to divide by 2. So multiply both sides by 2. We get 20 equals 6 plus y2. And then we subtract 6 from both sides. And so we get 14 equals y2. So -2, 14 is our answer. So the first thing that we should do is check to see if this actually makes sense. If we add so -2 plus -8 is -10 divided by 2 is -5. 14 plus 6 is 20 divided by 2 is 10. So we know the coordinate that we got for J works because it gives us this as the midpoint. So last is for the last one for the missing endpoint is for number 8, we have Q is -1, 3 as the midpoint. So again, Q is the midpoint for this segment. So that means we get -1 equals, we're going to say 5 plus x2 divided by 2, and we multiply both sides by 2, so we get -2 equals 5 plus x2, and we subtract 5 from both sides, so we get -7 equals x2. So we're trying to find the coordinates for R. So right now we know that R has an x coordinate of -7, and then to find the y coordinate, we do the same thing. So we get 3 equals 6 plus y2 over 2. We multiply both sides by 2, so we get 6 equals 6 plus y2. And we subtract 6, so we get 0 equals y2. 0 is a valid answer. So we get -7, 0. So the other endpoint has a coordinate of -7, 0. Again, you should check that with the first endpoint that you were given. 5 plus -7 is -2, divided by 2 is -1. 6 plus 0 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. This is how we know our midpoint checks out. So again, what we did was -7 plus 5 over 2 and 6 plus 0 divided by 2, and that gives us that as the midpoint. So the last 3 examples are if we are given just a line segment. So we have this line segment XY. So let's draw this. We have a line segment where we have X, we have another, and it has 2 endpoints XY. So line segment XY. And P is the midpoint of the segment. So we're going to put P as close to the middle as we can. So P is right here. So they tell us that XP is 8x minus 2. That means that the length from here to here is 8x minus 2. And we're also told that PY is 12x minus 30. So 12x minus 30. Let's make a note over here. The midpoint, we're going to write in all caps and underline it, always divides a segment into equal, and remember in geometry, we have a different word for equal. We want to say congruent segments. So all this means is that the distance from x to p is the same as the distance from p to y, which means that 8x minus 2 must equal 12x minus 30. So we get 8x minus 2 equals 12x minus 30. And this is a two-step equation or three-step equation. So let's say we subtract 8x from both sides. So we'll get minus 8x minus 8x. And that will give us negative 2 equals 4x minus 30. Let's say we add 30 to both sides. So we get plus 30 and plus 30. And so we get 28 equals 4x. I'm going to continue my work up here. So if we divide by 4, we get 7 equals x. So it says find the value of x. Make sure we're doing what the question requires. It says find the value of x. So x equals 7. But first, you should check your answer to see if you get the same thing for both xp and py. If we substitute in 7, we get 8 times 7 minus 2, which is 56 minus 2, which is 54. Or if we substitute in 7 for this x, we get 12 times 7 minus 30, which is 84 minus 30, which is also 54. So both of these segments have the same length of 54. For number 10, G is the midpoint of FH. So let's draw this segment first. We have from F to H, and G is in the middle. So we know that FG is 14x plus 25. So this segment is 14x plus 25. And GH is 73 minus 2x. So 73 minus 2x. So this segment length is the same as this segment length. That means that we should be solving the equation 14x plus 25 equals 73 minus 2x. So let's say we add 2x to both sides. So we get 16x plus 25 equals 73. And then let's say we subtract 25. So we get 16x equals 73 minus 25 is 48. And then say we divide both sides by 16. So we get x equals 3. So now this isn't the final answer. It says find the length of, find FH. So FH without the bar over it is the length of the line segment FH. So if x equals 3, to find the length of the entire segment, we want to substitute in 3 for x and then maybe double that value. So 14 times 3 plus 25 is, 14 times 3 is 42 plus 25 is 67. So this line segment is 67, and since is half the length of the line segment, 67 times 2, which is 134, is the length of FH. Let's not do example 11. It's the same as the other two. So in class, we'll do more practice with this, and we'll also talk about how we can use Desmos to help us do some of the calculations. So in this video, we covered distance and midpoint. We had the distance formula, which is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. We had the midpoint formula, which is x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. And last, we found missing endpoints if we were given the midpoint in one of the coordinates. One of the ways we did this was looking at it graphically, where we moved over a horizontal distance and down a vertical, up or down a vertical distance. We reversed that to find the other missing endpoint. If you have questions, maybe rewatch the video or come to class with specific questions.